Hi, boys and girls. Miss Kathy here from Shaler, North Hills Library with another episode of Greek Myth Mania. And today we have a very important episode. We have Heracles, which is the Greek name for the character you may recognize more as Hercules. Disney has a movie about him, and most of the world seems to refer to him as Hercules. Same man, though, as Heracles, who the Greeks started first. But because Rome kind of took over the world once they conquered the Greeks, we kind of have their name a little more familiar to us. But so if you hear me calling him Hercules sometimes, you'll know Heracles, Hercules, same person, but I may switch back and forth depending on if I'm in the right frame of mind or not. So this one may take a little bit longer because there is so much that happens to Heracles. So let's get started. We're going to be reading from our Delaire's Greek Myth book, and you have the website. If you printed out the packet from online, you have the website that you can go to if you would like to follow along with us reading. I will show you the picture here first. We are on page 132, and there is a picture, and we will find out just what that picture is about once we get started reading. Other than that, not much to look at in the beginning here. Proudly did the Muses sing of Heracles, often called Hercules, the strongest man who ever lived on earth, and the greatest of all the descendants of Danaus. So he is, well, they're going to tell us here. His mother was Princess Alcmena, granddaughter of Perseus and Andromeda, and famed for her beauty and virtue. So remember Perseus, who went and killed the Minotaur, and then coming back with Medusa, and then coming back with the head, he had to stop and save the Princess Andromeda, who was being fed to the sea monster by her father, because he thought that's what he had to do. Anyways, another story we covered in another week. You can go back and watch that previous episode, Perseus. But they became quite famous and a good king and queen, and their descendant is Heracles. His father was Zeus, so Hera, of course, hated Alcmena and pursued Heracles with her wrath. When he was an infant, the goddess sent 2 spotted serpents into his cradle, but little Heracles simply grasped them in his powerful hands and squeezed the life out of them. He grew stronger every day, but his trouble was that he did not know his own strength. Being of noble birth, he had to learn to sing and play the lyre, but Heracles would much rather wrestle and fight. One day his music teacher, Linus, scolded him for singing out of tune. So, just like the character in Snoopy and Charlie Brown, Linus, this is his music teacher's name. In a fit of fury, Heracles banged his lyre over the teacher's head, harder than he had meant to, and killed the poor man. Heracles was too strong to have around a palace, so he was sent into the mountains as a shepherd. Go! There he could use his tremendous strength on prowling beasts. Soon he had rid the countryside around Thebes of lions and wolves, and the fame of his strength spread far and wide. He came back from the mountains as a hero, and the king of Thebes regarded him so highly that he gave him his daughter in marriage. Hera did not like this at all, and she made Hercules insane. Raving mad, he swatted down his own children, mistaking them for wild beasts. When he regained his senses, he was horrified at what he had done, and went to the Oracle of Delphi to learn what he must do to atone for his crime. So we've mentioned the Oracle of Delphi before. That was like a prophet that would tell you what was going to happen. A very wise place to go to seek advice. And he goes and says, "What must I do to make up for this crime that I did. When he really didn't know what he was doing, he literally was not in his right mind because of Hera. He was told that he must serve for 10 years as the slave of his cousin Eurystheus and perform 10 labors for him, 5 and 10. Hera was pleased, for Eurystheus, the king of Mycenae, was a weak little man who hated his strong cousin Heracles. With her help, the king would surely think of the hardest tasks for Heracles to perform. For his first 4 labors, Eurystheus sent Heracles to rid the nearby countryside of dangerous beasts and monsters. So number 1. In the valley of Mania dwelt a monstrous lion whose hide was so tough it could not be pierced by any weapons. It was one of Echidna's dreadful offspring, which Zeus had let live as a challenge to future heroes. And you can look up Echidna. We covered her in a very, very early episode as well. But that is what this was a picture of, him and the lion. Heracles chased it out of its lair, seized it in his bare hands, and squeezed it to death. Okay, there's another picture I'll show you now, and a little one down there, but we didn't get to what they're talking about yet. Then he skinned the beast with its own claws, and with the impenetrable skin of the Nemean lion slung over his head and shoulders, he reported back to Eurystheus his first labor performed. In the swamps of Lerna, there lived a 9-headed Hydra, another of Echidna's brood. This monster was so poisonous that the fumes from his breath alone were enough to kill whatever came close to it. So this is labor number 2. Heracles filled his enormous lungs with air, held his breath, and ran at the Hydra. Swinging his club, he knocked off its heads, and one after the other they rolled to the ground. Seemed like a good idea, but no sooner had he knocked off one head than a new one grew in its place. He half turned around and let out enough air to call to his charioteer to bring a firebrand and sear the necks with a flame. Then no new heads could sprout. When Hera saw that Heracles was winning over the Hydra, she sent a giant crab to pinch his heel. With a mighty kick, Heracles sent the giant crab flying as he knocked off the last of the heads. Then he dipped his arrows in the Hydra's blood, making them so poisonous that a mere scratch from them was deadly, and he returned to Mycenae, his second labor performed. Boy, Hera really has it in for him, doesn't she? Okay, coming up on number 3. On the slopes of Mount Erymanthus roamed a wild and dreadful boar with tusks as sharp as swords. Eurystheus sent Heracles to bring this beast back alive. With loud yells, Heracles chased the boar out of its lair and drove it ahead of him all the way to the top of the snow-capped mountain. The heavy beast sank into the snow, and it was easy for Heracles to catch and subdue it. He pushed, dragged, and rolled it all the way down to the gates of Mycenae. When Eurystheus saw the fearful boar, he dived into an urn and barely dared to peek out. He's such a coward. He does this more than once. You'll have to listen. But he keeps jumping into urns. And so that's what that was a picture of, him battling the boar. And there's him hiding in the urns. Then Eurystheus sent Heracles to rid the Stymphalian lake of a swarm of dangerous birds. So this is labor number 4. They had feathers of brass, so sharp that when one of them fell to the ground, it killed whomever it hit. But they could not penetrate Heracles' lion skin, and he made such a din with a huge rattle, that the birds took fright and flew away, never to return. So that was the way he dealt with them. Eurystheus was distressed to see with what great ease Heracles had performed his first 4 labors. Now he sent him to bring back, alive, one of the sacred hinds of Artemis. So a hind is kind of like a deer. And remember, Artemis is the god of the woods and the forests and the wildlife, besides being the goddess of wisdom. He hoped that Heracles would harm the creature with his brute strength, and thereby earn the wrath of the goddess, get her mad at him. But Heracles pursued the swift deer with great patience over hills and dales. The year was almost over when at last he caught the deer. With great care he carried it back to Mycenae. Next, to humble his strong cousin, Eurystheus, so this is labor number 6 now, 5 plus 1. Eurystheus ordered Heracles to clean the stables of King Aegeus, who lived across the mountains to the west. King Aegeus had huge herds, and his stables and barnyards had not been cleaned for years. Heaps of dung rose mountain high. That means horse poop. He's supposed to clean out the stables from their horse poop. No man alive could clean his stables in a year, thought Eurystheus. But Heracles, with tremendous strength, changed the course of 2 rivers. The waters flooded through the stables and barnyards and washed them clean in less than a day. So he changed the course of the river so that they would flow through the stables. And that was number 6. No, 5. That was 6. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up in my numbers here. Eurystheus, now on the advice of Hera, sent Heracles far afield for his last 4 labors. So he did 6, he has 4 more to do. He must travel way to the east and fetch back to Mycenae the golden girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, so her belt. The Amazons were a tribe of wild and warlike women who rode better and fought harder than any men. Eurystheus was sure that even Heracles would be overwhelmed by the furious women. But when Heracles arrived in Amazon land, the proud queen was so taken by the sight of his bulging muscles that she gave him her belt without a fight. She would gladly have given him her hand in marriage in the bargain, but Hera, in the disguise of an Amazon, spread the rumor that Heracles had come to kidnap Hippolyta, to take their queen. Remember, this Hera, she does not stop. The Amazons threw themselves upon Heracles, but for once they had found their master. Heracles swung his mighty club, and the little Amazon husbands, who were spinning and cooking and tending the babies, were amazed to see their dangerous wives subdued by a single man. In triumph, Heracles returned to Mycenae with Hippolyta's belt. He could not bring the queen because she had been killed in the fight. So here is the picture of him showing off his lion skin and his strength, and the women all being submissive to him and the men doing the chores. He was able to win them over that way. Okay, going on. Far to the north, there lived a king whose name was Diomedes. So this is labor number 8. He was very inhospitable. It means he was not kind, and had trained his 4 mares to devour all strangers who came to his land, 4 horses. Now Eurystheus sent Heracles to capture the 4 man-eating mares and bring them back alive. Heracles traveled to the north, slew King Diomedes, and threw him to his own mares. When the mares had eaten the evil king, they were so tamed that they let Heracles drive them back to the gates of Mycenae. So that wasn't too bad. He killed the king and fed him to them. Then Eurystheus sent Heracles south to catch a fierce, fire-breathing bull on the island of Crete. The Cretans, who were great bullfighters, could not catch the bull, but Heracles seized the charging bull by the horns without heeding the flames from its nostrils, flung it to the ground, and returned to Mycenae, bringing the subdued beast. Eurystheus was glad he had a safe urn to hide in. There he goes, inside the urn again. For his 10th labor, Heracles was sent to an island far out in the ocean to bring back a huge herd of red cows. They belonged to Geryon, a monster with 3 bodies on 1 pair of legs. 3 bodies, 1 pair of legs. Heracles walked off with a powerful stride and soon reached the end of all land in the west. The only boat he could spot was the golden vessel of Helios, the sun god. Heracles aimed his mighty bow at the sun and threatened to shoot him from the sky if he did not lend it to him. Helios did not dare to refuse, and he let Heracles take his golden boat. Before he sailed off, Heracles pulled up 2 huge crags and set them down, one on each side of the strait that separates Europe from Africa. There they stand to this day, called the Pillars of Heracles. Crags are like mountains rising up. So, that was number 10. When Heracles was out at sea and the waves rose high around him, he aimed a poisoned arrow at the waves, threatening to shoot them if they did not still at once. The waves flattened in fear, and Heracles sailed on to Geryon's island. He began at once to load the herd of red cows, and Geryon's watchman and his 2-headed dog rushed at him. So we have Cerberus is the 3-headed dog guarding the gates of Hades, and now we have this 2-headed dog with Geryon. With one swing of his mighty club, Heracles did away with them both, the watchman and the dog. Then Geryon himself came running to attack him, his 3 huge bodies swaying on thin legs. Calmly, Heracles lifted his bow, took careful aim, and sent a poisoned arrow through all of the monster's 3 bodies. As time was getting short, Heracles rode back as fast as he could with the herd. When he arrived at the mainland, Hera sent a swarm of gadflies to sting the cows, and they scattered all over Europe. So, there we have it. Hera interferes one more time. Still, Heracles managed to round them up and bring them to the gates of Mycenae just before the year was up. There, Eurystheus sacrificed the cows to Hera, and, gratified, the goddess whispered into his ear that he must demand 2 more labors from Heracles. For his charioteer had helped him to singe the heads of the Hydra. He hadn't done it completely on his own. And not he, but the waters of the 2 rivers had washed the Aegean stables clean. So the poor guy thought of this ingenious way to solve this problem. They're not going to count it. And just because he asked someone to bring fire for him, he did all the thinking and all the fighting, they're not going to count it. So now we're up to 12 labors. Heracles scowled, but he bowed his head in submission, for he had won much glory from his 10 labors and hoped to win some more. For his 11th labor, Heracles was sent to find Hera's secret garden of the Hesperides and pick 3 golden apples from the little apple tree that Mother Earth had given Hera for her wedding gift. Nereus, the old gray man of the sea, was the only one on Earth who knew where the garden was, but he could not reveal the secret, and would not. When Heracles seized him to squeeze the secret out of him, Nereus tried to escape by changing himself into all kinds of animals. But Heracles held on to him, and at last Nereus had to tell him that the garden of the Hesperides lay west of the setting sun, not far from where the Titan Atlas stood, holding up the sky. So remember, back in the beginning, the Titans had fought against Zeus and his brothers and sisters and lost. And one of the jobs given to one of the Titans was holding up the sky. On his way to the garden, Heracles heard the groans of the Titan Prometheus, who was changed to the Caucasus Mountains. Heracles was in a hurry, but he felt sorry for the Titan and took time off to tear apart his chains. Zeus, impressed by the strength of his son, let him do it. In gratitude, Prometheus warned Heracles not to pick the golden apples himself, or he would die. They were apples of immortality and could only be picked by a god. And he is not a god. And there's one other little picture there of him dealing with the cows. Okay, Heracles traveled over land and over sea, and at last he came to the garden of the Hesperides. Nearby stood the Titan Atlas, and Heracles offered to hold up the sky for him if he would pick 3 golden apples from Hera's tree, because he is a god. Atlas said he would be glad to be rid of this heavy burden for a while, but he feared the dragon Ladon, which lay under the tree watching it with all the eyes of its 100 heads. A 100-headed dragon could not frighten Heracles. He drew his bow and shot it. Then he took the sky on his shoulders, and Atlas reached out and picked the apples. The 3 little nymphs who tended the tree wept bitter tears, but they could not stop Atlas now that the watchful dragon was dead. And there's a picture of all that going on. There's the watchful dragon and the 3 little nymphs and Atlas holding up the sky. Well, actually, that's Heracles holding up the sky, and Atlas is shown just kind of his arm picking the apples from the tree. We can know that's Heracles because he's got his lion skin on. Okay, but the story is not over. So, Heracles' knees started to buckle, so heavy was the weight of the sky. But Atlas stretched himself, enjoying his freedom. He's been holding that up for so long. I might as well take these apples to Eurystheus myself, said the Titan, and started to walk away. Heracles well understood that Atlas had no intention of ever coming back, but he pretended to agree. Very well, he said, just hold the sky while I make a pad of my lion skin, because this sky is very hard on my shoulders. That sounded reasonable to Atlas. He put down the golden apples and braced himself against the vault of the sky. Thank you for picking the apples, said Heracles, and hurried on home. So he tricked Atlas into taking the sky back and laying down the apples, and he's off. He's out of there. On the way to Mycenae, Heracles was stopped by the giant wrestler Antaeus. He lived in a hut beside the road and forced all travelers that wanted to pass by to wrestle with him. He was a son of Mother Earth and could not die as long as he touched her. So he always won and had built his hut of the skulls and bones of his victims. When Heracles threw the giant to the ground, thinking he was dead, he saw him springing up, revived. And then he understood what was happening. Seizing Antaeus, he held him in the air until he had squeezed all the life out of him. Because then he wasn't touching the earth, huh? Heracles hurried on to Mycenae and gave the golden apples to Eurystheus. But Eurystheus did not dare to keep them. He gave them to Athena, who took them back to Hera's garden where they belonged. Very good idea, huh? For his 12th labor, Heracles had to go to the underworld, capture Cerberus, the snarling, 3-headed watchdog of Hades, and bring him to Mycenae. Heracles searched far and wide till at last he found an entrance to the underworld near Helios's evening palace, far to the west. Setting his face in a terrible scowl, he walked straight down to Hades. The fluttering souls trembled, and Hades himself was so frightened at the sight that he told him to take the dog, only please not to treat it too roughly. Cerberus growled and lashed out with his spiked tail, but Hercules threw his arms around him and squeezed him till the dog's 3 tongues hung out. Whining, Cerberus let Hercules drag him to the upper world and all the way to the gates of Mycenae. When Eurystheus saw the fearful hound, guess what he does? Once again he dived into the urn and cowered there, not daring to make a sound. Heracles did not know what to do with the dog, so he dragged Cerberus all the way back down to Hades. And there is the king hiding in his urn, and there is Heracles with Cerberus, wrestling him into submission. Now, Heracles was free. He had performed not only 10, but 12 labors. He had atoned for his sins, and Zeus was very pleased with his strong son. He was pleased with Hera, too, for she had unknowingly helped Heracles win more glory and fame than any other hero on earth. Admired by everyone, Heracles traveled all over Greece, performing more heroic deeds and making many friends. But Hera, still relentless, again made him go insane, and he swatted men down like flies. When he recovered his senses, he once more had to atone for his sins, and this time it was his father Zeus who meted out his punishment, seeing to it that there was no glory to be won, because he thought his son was getting a little bit too proud. Zeus sentenced Heracles to serve for 3 years as the slave of Queen Omphale of Lydia. She dressed him in women's clothes and made the strongest man in the world sit at her feet, spinning and sewing with his huge hands, while she herself donned his lion skin and brandished his club. Heracles grumbled and groaned, but he did do as he was ordered. When his 3 years at last was over, he had learned his lesson of humility. Again he performed heroic deeds, and his friends were glad to see him back. One of his great friends was Admetus, king of Thessaly, under whom Apollo once had served when he was a slave on earth. To thank Admetus for his kindness, Apollo had persuaded the fates not to cut his thread of life when his time to die had come, as long as Admetus could find someone else willing to die instead of him. That would be easy, thought the king. His faithful men were always saying that his life was dearer to them than their own. King Admetus had always been afraid of dying early, for he was very happy with his beautiful queen, Alcestis. The king and the queen were both fond of Heracles and always welcomed him warmly. But one day, when Heracles came to the palace, King Admetus greeted him alone. He looked sad and downcast. When Heracles asked him what was wrong, he said nothing, except that a woman of the household had died, and he must go to her funeral. And he left Heracles alone with the servants. They too looked sad. They waited on him in silence and did not answer his questions. Heracles ate and drank and made merry alone, and at last he grew impatient, grasped one of the servants, and forced him to speak. The servant told him that the time had come for Admetus to die, and he had turned to his men and asked one of them to die in his stead. But now not one of them had been willing. Admetus then went to his parents, who were old and weary of life, and asked them to die instead of him. They too refused, but when he returned to his palace, he found Queen Alcestis setting off for the realm of the dead. She loved him so much, she said, she would gladly give her life for him. And the king was so fond of his own life that he let his queen depart. Now the king and all the household were mourning for Alcestis. Well, Heracles shed big tears, this sad story. But being a man of action, he seized his club and strode off to the underworld to force Hades to give Alcestis back. Such a loving wife should not be allowed to die, he said. Heracles did not have to use his club. Cerberus slunk out of the way as he stormed into the palace of Hades. The Lord of the Dead himself had a cold, unloving queen, and was so moved when Heracles told him of Alcestis' devotion that he did let her go. Remember, Persephone, his queen, Hades' queen, does not want to be there. Heracles brought Queen Alcestis back to King Admetus, and the grief in the palace changed to joy. Now they all ate, drank, and made merry together, and Alcestis grew famous far and wide as the most devoted wife who ever lived. Can't believe the king would let his wife die instead of him, though. Whoa! Heracles, too, wanted a wife, and he chose Danae, a Chaldean princess, for his bride. Danae had already been promised to the river god Heracles, but she dreaded the thought of being married to a river god who could change his shape at will. She would never know in which shape her husband would come home at night. She would rather marry the great hero Heracles. The two suitors agreed to wrestle. The victor would have the princess Danae. Of course, Heracles won. The river god rushed at him in the shape of a bull, and Heracles seized him by a horn, wrenched it off, and threw him to the ground before he had time to change into something else. So Heracles and Danae were married and were very happy together. One day as they were out traveling, they came to a swollen stream. Heracles forded it with ease, but Danae was afraid and stood on the bank. Along came the centaur Nessus and politely offered to carry her. Okay, so this is the stream, and there's the centaur offering to help her. But then, what do you see happening? We're going to get to that right now. He offered to carry her across, but Nessus, like all centaurs, was fond of pretty girls, and before he had reached midstream, he had made up his mind to carry her off. Once on the other side, he galloped off with her, and Danae screamed for help. Heracles shot a poisoned arrow at the centaur, and Nessus fell to the ground. Before he died, he whispered to Danae, "Take some of my blood and save it. If you ever fear that you are losing your husband's love, paint some of the blood on his tunic, and he will love you again." Danae carefully saved the drops of blood, for she knew well that many a girl would like to steal her magnificent husband away from her. One day, as Heracles was away at war, he won a great victory and sent a messenger home for his best tunic. He wanted to celebrate with his men, but Danae thought he wanted to make himself handsome for a girl. She painted some of Nessus's blood on the tunic, thinking that that's going to make him love her again. But as soon as Heracles put it on, he felt as though 1,000 fires were burning him. It was not a love potion that Nessus had given Danae, but the deadly poison of the Hydra from Heracles' arrow mixed with Nessus's blood. Heracles was so strong that the poison could not kill him, but his suffering was unbearable. He ordered his men to build a funeral pyre, spread his lion skin over the top, and lay down on it. So he's laying down on top of this big fire, and that's what we're seeing in this picture here. Then he gave his bow and deadly arrows to his young friend Philoctetes as a parting gift. As the flames rose around him, a loud thunderclap was heard, and Heracles, by the order of Zeus, rose up to Olympus, reclining on his lion skin. The gods all welcomed Heracles and were glad to have him with them, for the fates had predicted that Olympus would be attacked by a fearful enemy, and the Olympians could be saved only if the strongest man ever born fought on their side. The prediction soon came to pass. In a last effort to defeat the mighty thunder god Zeus, Mother Earth had given birth to 50 snake-legged giants who surrounded Olympus and tried to storm the palace. They seemed unconquerable, for, like Antaeus, whom Heracles had fought on Earth, they sprang up again, revived, as soon as they touched Mother Earth. Heracles knew what to do, and with his help the gods won over the giants and cast them down into the dismal pit of Tartarus. Heracles was now the hero of Mount Olympus, beloved by all the gods. Even Hera begged him to forgive her, and gave him her daughter Hebe, goddess of eternal youth, for his Olympian bride. From then on, Heracles lived in eternal bliss, forever a joy to the gods. His father Zeus was very pleased, and there he is rising up to the gods on Olympus. Finally done his labors and his time on earth, and he was made immortal. And that is the end of the story of Heracles. Told you that one was going to be a little bit longer because he had 10 and then 12 labors to perform. So let's take a look at some of our other books here real quick. Don't know that they're going to tell us anything different. Heracles, mortal hero turned god, is in this one. And we have the constellation named after Hercules, not after Heracles, but it is the 5th biggest in the sky, according to this. I gave you a site to go to in the packet to look up more about the constellation, but why he's weird: he fought centaurs, slayed a sea monster, and tamed man-eating mares, all for the chance to live forever. Well, he didn't know he was going to get to live forever. He was trying to atone for his sins. But I think here's his list of labors. There's a picture of a real boar. There is the picture on a vase of the Hydra. Show this to you up close. And some other pictures from the labors that he performed. Let's see if I can show you what they are here. One is slay the Nemean lion, so they have this picture of him wearing the lion's skin now. This was capturing the Ceryneian hind. The deer was so fast it took Heracles the entire year before he was able to nab it in a net. But then he did safely give it back to Artemis. And I think I mistakenly said at one point that Artemis was the goddess of wisdom. I was wrong. I got mixed up for a second there. Athena is the goddess of wisdom, but Artemis was the goddess of the wildlife. And that is what a giant Eurythian boar looks something like. Task number 5 was the stables, and there's some piles of poop to help you remember about the stables. Task number 5 was the Stymphalian birds. 6, I mean. 7 was the bull of Crete, and that's shown on a mosaic. 8, we have the man-eating mares of Diomedes, the belt of Hippolyta, and the cattle of Geryon, and the 3-headed monster. Now they have him shown on 3 pairs of legs as well. We heard only 1 pair of legs. Fetch golden apples from the tree guarded by the nymphs. And they were a wedding gift to Zeus from Hera, so didn't really want to mess with Hera, but he figured it out. And there's Atlas shown holding up the world. Task 12 was Cerberus. Poor dog couldn't be left in peace, and there's his 3 heads shown. No doubt Heracles was a giant among his peers, and historians believe that the ancient world honored this mega man with a supersized statue that possibly stood taller than a 4-story building, which doesn't seem very tall to us today maybe, but back then that was pretty tall. Constructed between AD 162 and 166, this marble sculpture stood outside a temple to Heracles, aka Hercules, in what is now modern-day Jordan. A catastrophic earthquake likely destroyed the statue, but 2 pivotal pieces remain: 3 giant fingers and an elbow. So this is a picture of the fingers that they think remain. Also known as the Hand of Hercules, this fragment is now one of antiquity's most revered sculptures. While experts can only guess what the rest of the sculpture looked like, all fingers point to the fact that it was easily one of the largest marble statues to have ever existed. just like he was one of the biggest heroes, if not the biggest hero. Okay, so then we move on to his constellation in the sky, and this is a picture of the stars and how the shape of him may be around the stars. I don't think this version of the story gives us anything different that we didn't know, though. Just double check here. Yeah, no, just showing you the constellation. And if you are interested, there is a book available at Shaler, North Hills Library that is the 12 Labors of Hercules. And it does have, it's by the same woman who does the pictures in this beautiful book. And it has each labor illustrated. The Lion of Mania, or the Hydra and cutting off the head. So each one goes through, and it's a whole book about the labors. So that's one you can get out if you are interested. Okay, let's look at our packet now. After all that good reading we did about it. There's a couple sites you can go to read about him, and there's the site you can go to find out about the constellation. And this one has, at the various sites that are listed here, each of them is a short little video, maybe 5 minutes long, that tells about one or two of the labors. So the site is listed on top, and then which labors are told about in that video are listed underneath. That's the longest one, I think, is the one that has the most labors included, and maybe 15 to 20 minutes long, but most of them are shorter. Okay, I think we covered all the labors with those videos, if you want to do that as a break. And then click through the pages of this animated site and read the text as you go, or have it read to you about his labors. There is a word search you can do on this sheet. It tells you about finding the words that are underlined. And those are the tasks, and that is what is hidden in the puzzle. And after that, you can do a crossword puzzle, Hercules crossword puzzle. And I don't think I gave you answers to that because there was not one available to print out. So you just have to do the best you can. And I think it is pretty straightforward, going through the 12 different labors and then a few other questions as well. But hopefully as you get some of the letters filled in, that'll help you with the ones you may not be so sure of. And then there is some coloring pages. I just printed out a few of them. There he is battling the Hydra, and there he is with the stag, and there he is with the Eurymanthian boar. Tells you a little bit about it down below. And the craft for this one was making a Grecian urn with scenes from his life, and it was pretty straightforward. Take a piece of paper, probably one that's a little lighter in color, and you fold it in half and cut out whatever first draw, and then cut out the shape you want your urn to be. And when you unfold it, it will be the same on both sides. And that's what I did. I folded it in half, cut it out, opened it up, and then I drew a scene from his life on there. And you can get inspiration from the internet if you type in Grecian urns. If you even go to type in Heracles labors and look under the images, you will find a lot of them are pictured on urns and things. So this is him fighting the Hydra. Looks kind of like a squid. My daughter said, because she was looking at it upside down, "What's he doing, fighting a squid?" Said, no, it's the Hydra, and I'm not a very good artist, so that is what mine ended up looking like. But you can draw any of his labors. You can draw more than one labor on the same urn if you would like. But this is the kind of thing that the king kept jumping into, because he got scared when Heracles would come around. Whoop, right in the top. So, all different kinds of stuff you can check out. And I think the constellation Heracles is actually up in our sky right about this time of year. So read about that online, and maybe you can actually go out on a clear night and check it out. So all different kinds of things you can do for Greek myth, Mania, and Heracles. He was probably the greatest hero from Greek mythology. So thank you for watching. This has been Miss Kathy from Shaler North Hills Library. Come in and see us in the library. We are open 6 days a week. Just check the website for our hours, and then you can pick whatever you want to get. But if you don't want to come in, we're still happy to fill requests for you as well, and you can pick them up at our pickup window. So thanks for watching today. Stay tuned next week for another episode of Greek Myth Mania. And I will see you then. This has been Miss Kathy. Bye.